At the edge of civilization, there exists a great swath of untamed wilderness. Filled with deadly animals and ancient tombs, it has become the graveyard of many kingdoms. And yet, many intrepid adventurers still seek to claim this land as their own. Will you be the one to finally tame the wild magic of this place? Or will you merely be the last king to fall? Pathfinder Kingmaker is a big, expansive, Western-style RPG. In it, you play as an adventurer who has been called to tame the unspoiled wilderness of an area known as the Stolen Lands. At the start of the game, you'll have the opportunity to customize your adventurer, deciding their name and race and class and what sort of special abilities and skills you want them to have. Once that's complete, you'll be dropped into the adventure, where you will be given the goal of claiming a region of wild country, hopefully where you will be able to establish a town that will one day grow into a kingdom that you will rule. Now, the structure of the game is similar to a lot of RPGs. At the beginning, you'll be traveling around a large overworld map. When you reach a point of interest, the view will change to that of a local map, which will allow you to explore in more detail. Different areas may include forests, mountains, or even dungeons that you'll have to navigate. Many of these places will include monsters, which you will battle in order to progress. As you explore, you may get the opportunity to recruit new party members to your cause. Often, these characters are of different classes, each with their own proficiencies and magical abilities. When combat does eventually happen, it happens in real time, with you and the enemy moving around the map and attacking simultaneously, although you do have the option of pausing combat so that you can give out more specific orders to your party members. As you fight and defeat monsters, you will be rewarded with money and experience. Money, as well as other treasures, can be used to outfit your characters, or buy useful consumable items like potions and scrolls from NPC vendors. When you gather enough experience, you can use it to level up your characters, improving their hit points and skills, and also unlocking powerful new abilities in their class. Eventually, you'll even get to the point where you have an entire team of 6 characters, each of them all loaded out with their own individual armor, weapons, and magical spells. Now, the Pathfinder game system was originally a pen and paper RPG, and if you're not familiar with it, don't worry, it shares a common ancestor with Dungeons & Dragons. So, a lot of what you see in the game will be similar. Really, if you're familiar with other Western-style RPGs, a lot of the monsters and spells and mechanics here should be fairly familiar. However, Kingmaker does have some things that set it apart from other games in the genre. For starters, the scope of the game is very large. Your goal is not simply to become a wealthy or powerful adventurer, it is to found a kingdom. And as part of that, the game includes an entire city-building subsystem, where you will be managing the various towns and villages that you've established, and where each building that you construct in your kingdom improves your income or security or stability. On top of that, the party members that you recruit will serve as your advisors and administrators, and they'll be tasked with solving specific events and quests that affect your entire kingdom. The scope of the game is also very broad when it comes to class and combat options. You have, at the start of the game, 15 different classes to choose from, each of them with 20 full levels of powers and abilities, and that's not even including subclasses and prestige classes and all the other options available to you. This game has one of the most expansive character creators amongst any of its contemporaries and allows you to make pretty much whatever type of character you want. Now, what's the good and bad of Kingmaker? Well, for starters, the presentation is great. The game has a great variety of locations. All the characters and monsters are well detailed. The music, the sound effects, and even the voice acting all contribute to building an excellent atmosphere. And probably most impressively, almost every individual magical weapon, armor, and spell that you can equip has been individually animated. Overall, the game looks fantastic. And it also has a ton of content. As I mentioned before, the scope of the game is very large. Kingmaker includes a huge map with dozens of locations to discover and explore. There are dozens of quests, a multitude of NPCs, and hundreds of items and potions and weapons and magical gear for you to find and collect. And what's great is that a lot of this feeds into the character customization options that I mentioned before. Not only do you have a lot of options on how you want to build and equip your character, you have a lot of options on how you want to play them as well. You can be a compassionate king or a ruthless tyrant. You can help your party members or send them off to their doom. You can even ignore them entirely and build a whole customized squad of player-generated characters. However, as good as Kingmaker is, and it's very good, and as impressed as I am by all the options available to you, I do have to admit that at times the scale is often overwhelming. In fact, if I had to summarize all the various inadequacies, I would probably say that Kingmaker is very much a victim of its own ambition. What do I mean by that? Well, consider this example. As you travel around the map, discovering new locations is partially based on your character's exploration skills, which means that occasionally you just won't find certain side quest areas, and that if you want to uncover them, you'll have to come back later once your characters have leveled up, which makes exploration tedious. Another good example. While being able to build your own kingdom is a satisfying reward for conquering the wilderness, the whole city management aspect is largely unconnected from the general gameplay. Travel and exploration time is measured in hours, combat is measured in seconds, but city and kingdom events are measured in weeks. It takes a long time for kingdom quests to both appear and resolve, which on one hand is good. If you're out and about adventuring, it means that you don't have to immediately rush back to the castle every time something happens. But it can also lead to situations where, if you're like me and proactive about solving quests and defeating enemies, there can be long stretches of downtime where nothing is really happening, and you're just sitting there as day after day passes waiting for your advisors to complete their tasks. But ultimately, the biggest strength of the game, and also its biggest weakness, is the sheer damn complexity of it all. As RPGs go, Pathfinder is a crunchy system, and to their credit, Owlcat Games have done a great job of adapting that system to a video game. But this means that you, the player, are going to be inundated with a daunting amount of information. As mentioned before, you have 15 character classes to choose from, but that's just the start. Once you've picked your class, you still need to manage your character's attributes, skills, class abilities, magical spells. There's an entire secondary power system called feats, and this is all before you've even started equipping them with weapons and armor and magical gear. Actually, no. You want to know how complicated this system is? Take a look at this piece of armor. This is a powerful, one-of-a-kind suit of magical armor that I found while exploring a dungeon. I have, as part of the normal game, 12 total characters in my party, and not a single one of them can use this set of armor, either due to class, alignment, or proficiency restrictions. This is what I'm talking about. There are so many options for you to choose from, and yet unless you invest substantial time into the system, you often won't know which ones will work for you and which ones won't. And what's worse is that the game doesn't provide you with enough opportunities to experiment. I mentioned before how the game allows you to build an entire party of custom characters, except doing so requires money. Money that you typically won't even have until midway or close to the end of the game, which is not when you'd want those characters anyway. You'd want to have them close to the beginning of the game so that you could try a lot of different things out. But probably the best example of complexity trumping utility that Kingmaker has to offer is the game's combat. Combat in this game is just as complicated as anything else I've mentioned before, but the consequences are much more severe. For starters, there's a lot of information that you have to be familiar with. Knowledge about how spells operate, how abilities activate, how your character's attacks and defenses work. And if at any time you, the player, don't have an explicit understanding of what's going on, you're going to be punished. There's a perfect example of this very early on. One of your first quests is to go and clear out a cave of spiders. So you gather your party members, march to the location, and enter the cave with your weapons drawn, at which point you are ambushed by a swarm of spiders and promptly die. And the reason for this, of which you may or may not be aware, is that swarms, as a type of monster, cannot be injured by weapons. You need magic or explosives in order to harm them. And even when you have those things, it's not guaranteed to work. You might run out of magical spells or miss with your thrown bombs, meaning that this is an uncomfortably fatal encounter. Now, to their credit, the developer does go out of their way to warn you about this scenario. But at the same time, this is also a situation where the developer had to go out of their way to warn you about this scenario. Because why would you, as the player, ever intuit that one of the earliest quests in the game could lead to the death of your entire party if you didn't have a very specific loadout of spells and equipment? This is what I'm talking about. If you don't have very familiar knowledge of the game system, it can often lead to quick and inexplicable deaths. And what's crazy is that sometimes that knowledge doesn't even help you, because the game is fundamentally unbalanced as well. The original pen and paper Pathfinder game system was designed around turn-based combat. But here, in Kingmaker, combat all happens in real time. Now, granted, I understand why the developers did this. They wanted to be able to have large-scale, multi-character battles where each individual turn wouldn't take an hour to resolve. The compromise was to push everything into a system where characters are all moving and fighting simultaneously. But the consequence of that decision is that everything in the game got shifted around, and now certain tactics and strategies just don't work anymore. For example, healing a character in a turn-based system is fairly straightforward. The cleric walks up to the character that they want to heal, casts their magical healing spell, and the target character recovers some hit points. Then that character's turn is over, and it's the next character's turn. But in a real-time system, so many more things can go wrong. The cleric might get interrupted or attacked, the fighter might defeat the enemy he was facing and now the cleric has to chase him down. Worst case scenario, the fighter continues to get attacked and then just dies before the cleric even has a chance to heal him. And this is just one example. Almost every element of the combat system, magic and melee attacks and even movement, have been just slightly altered from their original designs, making certain tactics and abilities no longer viable. I eventually found a workaround, which, by end of game, required, and I am not exaggerating this, 4 minutes and 15 seconds of pre-battle buffing my characters with every available support spell I had, just so that they would be prepared for whatever random nonsense combat would throw at them. And the things I'm talking about, they only get worse as the game goes on. The final levels in particular are a slog to get through. It's a massive difficulty spike and completely beyond anything else you've faced in the game. We're talking 2 huge dungeons filled top to bottom with enemy encounters, and all of the monsters have gaze attacks and ranged spell abilities and are immune to entire categories of magic. It is rough. Still, I can't deny there's something appealing about Pathfinder Kingmaker. It is one of the most ambitious, expansive, and complex RPGs I've ever played, and that's an advantage by itself. I have played the original pen and paper version, and Kingmaker, to its credit, allowed me to explore options that I'd never been able to before. I was able to see how a Dragon Disciple Barbarian would handle in combat. I was allowed to explore all that the Mystic Theurge class had to offer. And I was able to learn valuable lessons, like how I will never play a Mystic Theurge class ever again. Kingmaker is a massive game, and the developers deserve points for just the scale of what they've tried to accomplish here. But in adapting the system down to a video game, they also made a monster out of many of its features. I would give Pathfinder Kingmaker 3 out of 4 stars, but not as strong as a recommendation as you might think. This is an abominably complex game, overwhelming and often obtuse. I can really only recommend it to people that are already interested in it. If you want a large-scale RPG that has tons of characters and classes and items and magical spells for you to unlock and play around with, then yeah, definitely pick this one up. However, if you're new to the genre and if you don't have a history with Western-style RPGs, chances are you're going to find this game frustrating and intensely unwelcoming at times. Alright, well, that's enough from me. Thanks to you all, lords and ladies, once again for listening. Till next time. Alright, just gonna explore this region and oh my, what's this? A magical horse? And he wants me to follow him. Well, yes, certainly. I can't wait to see what mysteries await me. Oh my, what's this? A strange merchant? And he also has a magical horse. Well, this truly is a land of wonder. I wonder what else I'll be able to discover. Oh, look here, another horse and... Wait a minute, something's wrong. Oh God, oh no, oh, why horse? Why would you do this? Why would you do this to me?